It's important to understand that government regulates the construction process, even on a private construction project, in a number of ways. And we're going to look at three aspects of that in this presentation. One is simply building codes. Second, licensing of different participants in the construction process. And finally, occupational safety and health. So as to building codes, in Michigan, for example, the Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs has adopted a variety of codes that apply to different aspects of the construction process. There's the basic building code, the residential code, the code for rehabilitating buildings, mechanical, plumbing, etc. And these are all provisions that the construction will have to comply with. And so this is an obligation that's referred to generally in the owner-architect agreement as well as the owner-contractor agreement, that the work of the architect and the work of the contractor will comply with all applicable codes and regulations. Generally, without specifying in detail which codes, it's left to the architect and the contractor to figure out which codes apply and to make sure that whatever they're doing complies with the code, because the inspection is going to come and the work will have to be evaluated by a public official at various points in the construction process, and if it's not up to code, then it'll have to be redone. So building codes are one of the most important areas of government regulation, even when we're talking about private construction. And most of these are based on model codes, the International Building Code, for example. And so even though these building codes exist have been adopted at the state level and they're enforced typically at the municipal level, and that's true across, in most jurisdictions in the United States, there's a great deal of uniformity in what building codes require around the country. That's not to say that it's possible that there aren't variations. There certainly are variations from one jurisdiction to another. But having said that, there are some best practices that are usually reflected in these different kinds of building codes. And this is an area that contractors and architects have to be very much aware of. Licensing requirements is another area another point at which the government regulates the construction process. And most jurisdictions require the design professionals, architects and engineers, to be licensed in that state, and that's the whole process that they have to go through, as well as general contractors, home contractors, and certain types of specialty trades, such as electricians and plumbers and whatnot. And the point of all this is mainly to protect the public, so that it's just like regulating doctors or lawyers or anyone else, to make sure that there is a minimum standard of competency out there, and that these folks are familiar with the building codes that apply to their work and are capable of designing buildings that won't fall down or bridges that won't collapse and kill people. So all of these are heavily regulated. And one of the things that's important to understand is that when you get a general contractor, for example, doing work, and the general contractor is not licensed, this is something that often will preclude the general contractor from making any sort of breach of contract claim against anybody, because as a matter of public policy, they're not permitted to do so. A final area where the government regulates the construction process is in connection with occupational safety and health. And at the federal level, this is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is part of the Labor Department. There's also NIOSH, the National Institutes of Occupational Safety and Health, which is part of the CDC. And much of that's administered on the ground through the states. And in Michigan, that's the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And the point here is to help protect workers and make sure that they're performing their work safely under safe conditions, because the construction process is inherently dangerous. There are lots of things that can go wrong, lots of ways people can get hurt, and when people get hurt on construction projects, it's often very severely, and so it's one of the more heavily regulated employment areas in the country. So we've talked about different ways in which the government regulates the construction process, particularly in terms of public construction, public bidding requirements, prompt pay requirements, things like that. But there's also this whole area of building codes, licensing of professionals, and safety and health that have to be taken into consideration. And usually the way these are handled in construction contracts is not by saying, thou shalt comply with OSHA, thou shalt comply with the building code, thou shalt comply with your licensing requirements, whatever. Usually how it comes up is there will be a warranty, a representation and warranty from the architect, for example, that it's duly licensed in all jurisdictions necessary to perform the work, that all of its work will comply with any applicable laws. Same thing with the contractor. These general statements, they won't usually get to the level of detail of specifying exactly which building code applies, but rather have a catch-all provision that whoever's performing whatever work is going to comply with all of these things, including licensing requirements, including the building codes, including the occupational safety and health requirements.